Hi, my name is Caroline, and I am a studio instructor here at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts. Thank you for watercoloring with me. Today, I'm going to teach two watercolor techniques that you can use at home. Those two techniques are called wet on dry and wet on wet. So in front of me, I have my watercolor paper, which is thick enough to absorb my watercolor pigment. I have my watercolor cake paint, but you can also do this with watercolor tube or crayons or colored pencils or markers if they are watercolor kind. And I also have some watercolor brushes with a cup of clean water. So for this technique, I am going to pick a wide brush to start. And I am going to start with the wet on dry technique. So I'm just going to get some water on my brush, and then I'm going to load up my brush with some pigment, which just means I'm going to fill up my brush. So now you can see there's some blue on there. Now with wet on dry, it means my brush is wet, but my paper is dry. So to start, I'm just going to make this nice line like so. Now, wet on wet, I'm going to clean my brush just by swirling at the bottom of my water cup, and I'm going to load up my brush with just some water. For this technique, I want my brush to be wet and my paper to be wet. So I'm going to just put some clear paper or clear water on my paper like so. And I'm going to load up my brush and then apply my color like so. And you can see this is totally different than the first technique, even though I use the same color and the same stroke. Wet on dry versus wet on wet. So now I'm going to pick a smaller brush so you can see variety. I'm going to pick a color, load up my brush, and now instead of just doing a straight line, I'm going to see what does it look like if I make a curvy line. Then speed up the process by using my thick brush over here, and I'm going to make my paper wet. And then get my pigment and apply with the same stroke. But see how it's totally different. The color is exploding and moving and very fluid on the wet on wet. Very different looks. Let's see, now I'm going to go even smaller with my brush. And see how small brush strokes I can make. And then the same thing, but my wet on wet. Same color, and just drop them in. I love the movement in these. But you can start to think how this could be useful in some spaces more than others. Okay. So now I'm also going to be inspired by a piece in the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts collection. There is a German artist named Ernst Wilhelm Ney, and he uses watercolor on paper for one of his pieces titled Composition. Now I'm going to do a little bit of an experiment myself to show you what it would look like if I use the technique of wet on dry versus wet on wet. So over here on the left, again, I'm just experimenting with my pigment. This is wet on dry. I know exactly where my watercolor is going to move. I'm going to add some fun splash of red in here. Like so. Now, opposite of that, I'm going to try wet on wet. So first I'm just laying down my clear coat of water. Like so. And then I'm going to have fun by throwing in all of my colors. Notice how they explode across the page. Notice how I'm also cleaning my brush between colors so I can keep my palette nice and clean. Now that you know the techniques of wet on dry and wet on wet, you can investigate Ernst Wilhelm Nye's piece yourself and see what technique do you think he used in his art. Thank you so much for joining me for watercolor techniques. I hope you have fun trying them out yourself at home.